I'm Alicia Modestino. I'm the research director for the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy and an associate professor at Northeastern University with joint appointments like everywhere, but really in econ and public policy. And thanks for inviting me to talk about this topic because it's summer and it's getting covered a lot in the media. And President Biden actually cited our research evidence from Boston as one of the ways that cities and states could use American Rescue Plan funds to curb youth violence. So I'm really happy to talk about this here today. Let me be able to advance my slides here. There we go. So this segues really nicely from what Patrick was just talking about shooting. Just like a lot of American cities, Boston saw a big increase in shootings in 2020. It was a 29% jump. Not too surprisingly, on the right-hand side there, it shows you that this was occurring largely in the same neighborhoods that it usually does, largely in low-income neighborhoods of color like Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. And of particular concern at the time was the rise in violence among youth. And so in response, then Mayor, now Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, used our research evidence to produce from our ongoing evaluation to justify investing an additional $4 million of CARES Act funding into the summer jobs program. And that funding was used to develop in-person and virtual opportunities during the pandemic. But what was really key is the focus on trying to provide similar skill development as prior years with the explicit intention of reducing crime and providing greater opportunity among low-income youth of color, particularly in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. And since then, Acting Mayor Kim Janey has continued to expand the program and other youth services as part of this larger effort to have a more peaceful summer. So that just gives you a little bit of the context of what's been going on in Boston. To talk a little bit more about the program, Boston relies on about $10 million, braids together city, state, private funding to connect about 10,000 youth every summer to about 900 local employers. Every summer, the mayor, here's Mayor Walsh, they go out and they drum up support for the program among employers. And a lot of the rationale he's giving there is a lot of the motivation for the program, and it actually kind of resonates with a lot of the things that we found. How does it work? So participants work a maximum about 25 hours a week for a 6-week period. So it's basically right after July 4th through the end of August. They're placed in a job with either a local community-based organization or a nonprofit or a private sector employer. And they're given 20 hours of additional training using a career readiness curriculum that I'll talk about more in a minute. So some of you might be wondering, why would you turn to summer jobs as a way to reduce crime among youth? Here's 4 primary mechanisms that we can think about. And that's also what I'm going to focus on, is thinking about these mechanisms. That's something that's a little unique about this study. So the first is just reducing opportunities to engage in delinquent or criminal behavior. And that's really where the program, all of these summer jobs programs started, was to keep kids off the street, keep them out of trouble. And really, because these programs occur when youth are idle, they're particularly attractive for that reason. But we can also think about the program changing behaviors, right, that are correlated with delinquency and crime. So either disrupting routine activities like who the kids are hanging out with on the street, whether or not they have any supervision, giving them some socially productive activities where they get supportive relationships with adults and other peers, giving them tasks that help them develop a sense of identity and agency and competency. All these things are really important when you are a teenager, right? You're trying to move into adulthood. And then the career readiness program that I mentioned is actually explicitly trying to develop these behaviors as well. Third, we can also think that this program is going to make crime less attractive, right, by improving your future opportunities. So that's the idea about nothing stops a bullet like a job. They're developing some work readiness skills that are going to help them get a job in the future. We're boosting academic aspirations, career aspirations, whether that's to attend some kind of career training or go to college. And really, the summer jobs program is serving youth who are younger, and they're more likely to still be enrolled in school. So they're less likely to have been incarcerated, even if they've been court involved. So we might want to think about summer jobs as kind of intervening at a critical time in the life course for youth that might be likely to engage in violent crime. And then the last thing we really can't discount is that this is a cash transfer program. It totally flies under the radar because it looks like youth development and employment, but it's providing income directly to youth that can reduce the motivation to engage in theft, but can also help reduce poverty. And we actually find in our data that half of the youth in the program are helping to pay for some kind of household bill, whether they're contributing to rent, utility bill, groceries, even their own cell phone, which, I would love it if my kids would do that. Since 2015, I've been conducting a multi-year evaluation of the summer jobs program in partnership with the city of Boston. And until recently, there really wasn't a lot of empirical evidence that workforce development programs could improve criminal behavior among young people without like really high touch, high levels of investment. But over the past 5 years, Judd Kessler, myself, Sarah Heller, we've been doing a lot of work in New York, Chicago, Boston, and all of this work has been based on randomized control studies. And so in Boston, like New York, it's an embedded lottery design where the city is using a lottery assignment that happens during the recruitment period there. The kids go through the program mostly in July and August, and then there's a post-observation period. And so we're looking to follow you for, usually it's the next 1 to 2 years after the program. And unlike other studies, my study here is capturing both short-term behavioral changes that happen during the summer. So we run a pre-post program survey that's capturing things like social emotional learning, soft skills, community engagement, changes in academic aspirations to go to college, changes in job readiness skills, like being able to put together a resume and interview, et cetera. And so what we're doing there is then we're linking those short-term things that kids learn in the summer to that longer-term follow-up period where we can see them in the administrative data. And we're linking them to not just criminal arraignment records, but also high school records and employment and wage records. And then we disaggregate all these impacts to focus on how we might be reducing inequality across groups, primarily by socioeconomic and racial status. So what did we find that was so compelling? We've done this across a number of different types of outcomes. The one I'll focus mostly on here is going to be the reduction in crime. And what we found there was that it's largely improvements in soft skills that were linked to a 35% reduction in violent crime and a 29% fall in property crime for the treatment group during the 18 months after the program ended. We also find that youth improve their academic aspirations and also their work habits. So like the number one thing that kids will say when you ask them what they learned during the summer is how to show up on time, which apparently you don't learn in school, but you learn when you're on the job. And that is linked to better attendance. It turns out if you attend more school, that is linked to higher grades. Turns out that all of that is linked to a greater likelihood of graduating from high school on time. And then finally, we've also found some evidence that it boosts employment through job readiness, but mostly that's for opportunity youth who are older, who are done with their schooling, because otherwise largely your summer job ends at the end of the summer. So if we delve into the crime results a little bit, we get a little bit of better understanding of those mechanisms that I was mentioning. So first thing to note is that largely this is impacting violent and property crime, not so much other types of crime. Like we also look at drug crimes, gun crimes, that are not used in a violent crime, and other kinds of crime like disturbing the peace. And those pretty much occur as frequently, even, you might think there's a little slight uptick there, though it's not statistically significant. But we might think that, okay, so these things are still occurring like they were, but maybe they don't get escalated into a violent crime. We also find that there's similar reductions in whether it was a misdemeanor or a felony. And to some extent, though, even though the program really seems to only reduce violent and property crime, it turns out this is really economically meaningful, as you can imagine, because these are the most costly crimes to individuals in society. And so we find even just that 35% reduction in violent crime alone is associated with a cost savings of about $1,800 per youth in terms of victimization costs, not even counting the court costs or incarceration or any of those other things. And that's even throwing out the homicides that occurred in the control group. So super conservative estimate that gives us a return on investment of about 3 to 1 for the summer jobs program. Now, the other thing that we can look at is the timing of this impact. And so I told you one of the really popular kind of mechanisms was thinking about keeping kids off the streets and keeping them incapacitated during the summer. It turns out that's not really what's going on here. And if you talk to participants, they'll say, yeah, well, a lot of crime occurs at night and I'm not working at night. And so really what's happening is that a lot of this is accumulating over time. So that's what this figure is showing you. It's the cumulative treatment effect over time, with each point adding an additional month of data to the prior effect. And you can see the dotted lines there indicating the 95% confidence interval. And really it's not until like 6 months or so after the start of the program that we see a statistically significant reduction in violent crime for the treatment group relative to the control group. Now, why might this be the case? It could be that we are affecting behaviors during the course of the summer, and that these might be somewhat long lasting. So to delve even further into that, I go back to that pre-post survey data that I mentioned earlier. And that's a survey, again, that's telling us about soft skills, community engagements, whether you want to go to college, whether or not you have these job readiness skills. And then I look to see how these are correlated with that reduction in violent crime. And what I find is that really it's the participants that showed significant gains over the summer across the soft skills. So like managing emotions, resolving conflict with a peer, asking for help. Those are the kids where we see a relative reduction in violent crime. It's not so much correlated with job readiness or academic aspirations. And that might also explain why we see a larger impact on certain subgroups like males who are at risk for crime, and also those who've had a prior arraignment before the start of the program. So just to wrap up, my 5 key policy takeaways for summer jobs as an intervention for reducing crime are the following. So first of all, there's really clear and compelling evidence that summer jobs reduce violent crime. You can find it in Boston, Chicago, New York. We all show very similar effects, very similar timing. And also these programs are oversubscribed. That's why they have random assignments and lotteries. And so they're shovel ready for ARP money, I would say. Second, the timing of the impact and the data on those other outcomes suggest that the program does change behavior in some way. Now, there's other programs that affect social emotional learning that can have similar impacts on violence, like becoming a man. And we certainly need more evidence about whether that reduction in violent crime that we're seeing in the first 18 months to 2 years lasts, beyond that 2-year mark without any other kind of intervention to keep it going, right? Like we kind of just have like a 6-week intervention here. And so you might imagine that it could fade out over time. The third is that so these summer jobs programs also yield these other benefits that I mentioned, right? So youth are gaining job experience, they're more likely to graduate from high school. And so really the narrative around summer jobs needs to change. It's not just about staying out of trouble. I know it's like a super sexy result for policymakers and it gets everyone's attention, but a lot of these programs have really shifted from keeping kids out of trouble to trying to give them meaningful employment experiences that are going to help them down the road. And that really lends itself to my fourth point here that, we show that these programs can operate at scale. They already do, right? New York City employs 75,000 kids every summer, Boston, 10,000. But quality is somewhat a concern for replication, right? So you need strong relationships with nonprofits and employers. That takes time. And you need to make sure that these are actual job experiences, not just warehousing, to get that change in behavior. And then finally, we've been finding in Boston, it's really time to break down the silos between education and workforce development. Each of these domains reinforces the other, and they're both developmental for youth. And we learned that even giving conditional cash transfers to low-income youth to take community college courses is almost as effective as some of this, the job experiences. And so, it helps to be able to reduce that trade-off between needing a paycheck and investing in the future.